The thundering crash of water on the naked rock face gives these mountains their name, the Gesäuse, or Roaring Mountains. Irresistible to climbers. The Roaring Mountains form a vertical world that knows only two directions, straight up or straight down. People have been trying to conquer this fortress of rock for over 500 years. There was a time when these mountains were pure wilderness, but now the Roaring Mountains form Austria's youngest national park, and this is its story. The entrance to the Roaring Mountains is guarded by the Benedictine monastery of Admont, established in 1074. It houses the largest, oldest, and probably the most beautiful Baroque library in the world, with 200,000 books and countless precious manuscripts. Admont built up its impressive collection over 1,000 years without disturbance. There are some treasures in its archives still waiting to be rediscovered. Ancient volumes, folders, and books can reveal the untold saga of the Roaring Mountains. And no one knows more about it than Józef Hasička. Hasička is a historian who specializes in the history and the people of this region. Copper mining began in the Eastern Alps over 4,000 years ago. But the Roaring Mountains, with their steep forests and ravines, were left alone. A cold, shadowy world of bare rock and water. Ancient fairy tales tell of the dangers that stalked these forests. Strange birds and savage creatures, such as the lynx. Today, the lynx and the brown bear are protected species in Central Europe and are the main attraction of alpine national parks. But in the Middle Ages, brown bears shared the forests with ghosts, witches, and dwarves. A realm of darkness between the river and the high rock faces where no one dared to enter. And as long as talking animals, enchanted princes, and the big bad wolf were thought of as real, the animals in the forests of the Roaring Mountains were safe from humans. The first reports of visits to this dramatic landscape date back to the 12th century. Only recently, Józef Hasička found a description in the Vita Gebhardi, the biography of monastery founder Gebhard of Salzburg. Haschitska is translating the Latin manuscript directly into German.
Ambitut celo proxime circumuratus. Also es ist von Natur aus bewacht durch einen Kranz sehr, sehr hoher Berge im Umkreis und reicht nahezu an den Himmel reichen. Prospectus nisi in montes aut sursum versum non est, hoc monastice et clusione restruenti natura idoneum.
One monk, whose name has long disappeared, wrote this about the valley. It is like a dark, sinister cathedral, encircled by vertical walls and ominous towers. Its roof far, far above the sky itself. Every story has its own hero. In the Alpine saga of the Roaring Mountains, the hero is a Benedictine monk, Father Gabriel Strobel. Strobel had a lifelong passion for insects, especially flies, and he collected and catalogued more than 80,000 specimens. But he was also fascinated by plants, and was acknowledged as one of the most respected botanists of his day. Gabriel Strobel came to the monastery as a young man in 1866. When he died, he left behind him one of the world's best insect collections. The monks of Admont were the first to take a scientific interest in the Roaring Mountains. They were known as scientists in habits and hobnail boots. No forest was too dark for them, no rock face too steep. Long before mountaineering was invented as a discipline, and without any equipment to speak of, these men of God challenged the highest peaks in their quest for knowledge. Several of the peaks were first conquered by monks, and a monk was the first to accurately measure their heights. Not long ago, Josef Haschitska found a letter written in August 1814, in which Father Albert Mucha describes his surveying expedition to Mount Kaibling. One summer morning, Father Mucha and Urban, the archivist, set off to climb the peak, guided by a local hunter. Urban was almost blind, and the climb must have been an ordeal for him. Mucha wrote, "Getting ever closer to the peak, we felt shivers running down our spine as we looked into the deepening abyss. Blind Urban, though, who went to his knees every couple of steps to pay his respect to the grey peak, cheered us up mightily." With my load of scientific instruments, barometer, thermometer, notebook, pens and food, I felt like a beast of burden. At that time, nobody climbed peaks like this for fun. These monks were the first to scale the mountains on their scientific missions, and they were the first to reach the summit and gaze down on the sweeping panorama of the Roaring Mountains.
Ein wunderschöner Ausblick.
Although Father Mucha was a professor of philology, he knew how to use scientific instruments, such as the theodolite. Among other surveys, Muka took barometric altitude measurements on Mount Kaibling, calculating its height from the air pressure reading. He was amazingly accurate, estimating an altitude of 2,156.6 meters above sea level. Modern satellite measurements reveal that the mountain is only 40 meters higher than that. Since the days of Father Muka, the land, the river, and above all, the valley, have been transformed in many ways. But the region of steepest rocks and highest peaks seems timeless. The national park is divided into 4 zones: water, forest, alpine pastures, and at the very top, bare rock. This is the realm of the chamois and the marmot. The marmot spends most of its life underground, but the chamois lives its life here, between heaven and earth. The 2 species share this harsh, bleak habitat. Up here, food is scarce, the summer changeable and short, and the winter unforgiving. The marmot has a simple solution. In summer, it eats and eats until it's fat enough to last through the winter. When autumn arrives, it'll just go to sleep. For the chamois, time is precious. The young are born in May, but will have to be strong and sure enough in only 5 months to climb narrow ridges in a snowstorm. The flora of the mountains is less dramatic, but just as beautiful. The region beyond the tree line looks stark and barren, yet limestone is rich in nutrients, giving a wonderful variety of flower species. We know about the plants of this region because Gabriel Strobel left a unique herbarium, which is still an important reference today. Strobel kept exact records of his botanical excursions. In his diary, he tells how he risked his life in search of unusual plants. As I admired and scrutinized the manifold varieties, allowing myself to be distracted by rare flowers here and there, I inadvertently lost my way. When I finally noticed that I'd gone astray, I retraced my steps, but still could not find my way. Finally, high above me, I saw a footpath meander between the rocks. After leisurely contemplation, I climbed up again, along the mountain's edge and past vertiginous drops that would make the blood freeze in horror for one who dared to look into the precipice, standing on such precarious ground. Suddenly, having climbed about the height of a house, the stone I was standing on with my left foot came loose and rolled down. Quaking with fear, I wanted to go up, but whichever way I turned, there was nothing but loose rocks. Never before had I walked on such a dangerous trail. In the beginning, I was reluctant, but I had no choice but to go on. And after a while, I even enjoyed staring at the bottomless depths and looking up at the mighty walls of rock. In the end, I successfully negotiated this dangerous stretch and arrived on the trail whose highest and most distant point was the Spara Fields. And it was here that I saw the most magnificent alpine flora I have ever set my eyes upon. Spellbound, my eyes drank in the unspeakable beauty of these flowers. Every single one of them a masterpiece of creation, while I eagerly filled my collector's box. It is utterly beyond my humble skills as a writer to put better words to what I felt at that altitude. Where the feelings well from the bottom of the heart, words are a poor substitute indeed. Whether there are any words at all to describe the impression of such an endless panorama on the viewer, I do not know. Even with modern equipment, the weather is so unpredictable that these mountains are still a dangerous venture for mountain climbing. The narrow valley sucks in the air, compressing it like a turbine, then forces it against the rock face where it's deflected upwards, cools and releases rain, snow or hail onto the peaks. At the lowest level of the national park, the dominant force is water. Depending on the weather, the river ends, meanders, flows, or crashes through the valley. In theory, the river Enns accounts for only 1% of the national park's area, but is the master builder of the Roaring Mountains, carving a canyon 1,700 meters deep over millions of years. Yet below the surface of this turbulent water lives an unusual creature. Its long, thin shape is perfectly streamlined in the fast-flowing river. The brook lamprey is a descendant of the first fishes, which did not have true jaws. Instead, it has a sucker-like mouth. These are adult lampreys. They're only adults for a short time, just long enough to reproduce. For the last 4 years, they lived on the muddy riverbed as worm-like larvae, feeding on organic matter they filter from the water. More elusive than the brook lamprey, the European river otter. With its valuable fur and tendency to hunt fish, it was itself hunted to the edge of extinction. But recently, there have been sightings of otters in the national park. The common European toad is not endangered, not yet. But that could change as toads are run over in their thousands when they travel to their spawning sites under cover of darkness. Amphibians depend on wetlands, and wetlands are only safe from human disruption when they're part of nature reserves. Italian crested newts are found all over the Roaring Mountains. They have a complicated mating ritual. This looks like a female practicing a complex form of origami, but she's folding a leaf with her hind legs to make a pouch for her eggs. A male approaches and positions himself at just the right angle in front of the female. He arches his back, then wriggles in ecstasy as he releases his semen. The River Enns is anything but a pristine alpine river. It flows untamed through the Roaring Mountains, but in the valley below, most of the water is diverted through the turbines of a power station. The pristine river carries its own load. Stones, rocks, and gravel create a habitat of their own. In the summer, the Ukrainian brook lamprey builds its spawning beds in the bottom of the river. Mating is the final climax, the dramatic last act in the lamprey's life. Once it has spawned, it dies. Above the surface, the river creates and destroys gravel islands in patterns that are natural to an alpine river. For an otter, this is an ideal hunting ground. This is one of the few places where everything, from the riverbeds through all the forest zones to the bare rock at the summit, can all be seen in one view. In the national park, there are still some remnants of the forest of the floodplain, but elsewhere it's been destroyed by dams, roads, and railway lines. Grey alders and white willows, washed and fertilized by the swelling water, overgrown with breathtaking variety of plants. This is how these forests of the alpine rivers used to be. The Roaring Mountains are a world dominated by the vertical. The mixed woodland starts less than 100 meters above the river. That trees can grow at all on such a steep rock face seems miraculous. The presence of the capercaillie is a sure sign that the woodland forest is still unspoilt. The capercaillie feels safe in this coniferous forest. It is somewhere to hide at night. And the forest provides plenty of food. The pioneer of forestry research in this area was, of course, Gabriel Strobel. As well as keeping detailed records about local plants and animals, Father Strobel and his fellow monks built up a legendary collection of natural history specimens. Stuffed birds and mammals are reminders of the wildlife that once roamed freely round Admont. There have been people in the region for over 4,000 years, but the mountains and ravines were left in peace until the beginning of the 16th century. Animals that have long disappeared from these parts lived here undisturbed, out of sight of humans. But then, one day, the peace of the forest was shattered by the sound of a cut. The 16th century saw an increasing demand for wood to fire the iron furnaces. The earliest felling permit in the Roaring Mountains dates back to 1503.
Der Peter des Florians.
It takes an historian to make complete sense of this ancient German document. But basically, it names the person licensed to exploit a particular section of the forest. Before the wood was used as fuel, it was turned to charcoal. In and around the Roaring Mountains, smoke started rising from the charcoal piles, and would do so for centuries. Charcoal was so important that the volume of timber wasn't measured in cubic meters, but in barrels, giving the volume of charcoal produced by that amount of wood. The imperial family of Austria forced the monks of Admont to allow their forests to be exploited by the mining industry. First to go were the forests of the floodplain of the River Enns. But the furnaces were never satisfied, forcing the loggers deeper and deeper into the forest. Soon they were facing ravines with no trails and turbulent rivers with no bridges. The dipper, a skilled flyer and diver, is totally at home here. But the landscape seemed impossible to the loggers. But finally, even the steepest rock faces gave in to adventurers armed with axes and saws. Austria's famous poet and novelist, Peter Rosegger, described the loggers' dangerous journey to the felling site. Sometimes the trail is just like an extremely narrow corridor hewn into the rock. Sometimes it is fixed with iron brackets and leads up vertical rock faces. Some passages it would be too kind to call a trail, for they are mere iron rungs drilled into sheer rock to support the foot. Any hint of dizziness here means certain death. Flimsy-looking structures were needed to get the workers into the forest and the logs out. The logs were hauled downhill in massive chutes and then dumped in the river to float downstream. Once the lock was opened, the white water crashed in, dragging with it the logs and blocks of wood, banging them against the rocks with an almighty noise, knocking them over, pushing them down vertical precipices, rolling them from slope to slope, and then finally discharging them into the river Enns. With such dangerous and exhausting work, the lumberjacks were known for their strength. They were tough men, rough and ready. Each logger was burning up to 8,000 calories a day, so they needed plenty of fuel. It must have been one of the most demanding jobs in history. Every year, a moment arrives when everything freezes. A time of silence, of still tranquility. Winter transforms the mountains into a place of unreachable, aching beauty. Bitter cold, short grey days, ice and snow. Then, as now, few humans would brave the mountains in winter. But for the animals, the season with no hikers, forest workers, scientists or tourists is a time to relax. The land belongs to the restless hunters like the lynx, and to eager predators like the golden eagle. The lynx prefers to hunt at dusk. Only a very hungry lynx will risk being out in the open during the day. The golden eagle is also hungry. Food is scarce, and its favorite prey, the marmot, is hibernating. When the big predators are hungry, a smaller predator such as a stone marten is no longer a hunter. It's now the hunted. And the stone marten is attracting a lot of attention. A lynx on one side, an eagle on the other. Time to leave. Food is scarce in this winter paradise, and life is hard. The chamois are too big for the lynx to kill, and they stay up beyond the tree line, well out of reach. The lynx just doesn't roam about at random. It lives mostly in the dense forest, with its own clearly defined hunting ground. And even in the winter, the chamois live further up the mountain, rarely coming down to the forest. The steep rock faces might protect the chamois from hunters, but these slopes are still dangerous. Even for expert climbers like the chamois. But for the lynx, this was a happy accident. By January, game killed by accident is often all there is for the hungry ravens, golden eagles, and other birds of prey. In late winter, when everything is buried deep in the snow and the silence, it seems impossible that life will emerge from every crevice in just a few weeks. But is all the life waiting to emerge the wildlife of today? Is nothing left from the pristine roaring mountains? Not even a single hidden valley, a truly ancient tree or shrub. There is always hope that something might be found, especially if Józef Hašicka buries himself deep in the forest archives. The whole area has been owned by the monastery for centuries. Details of every trail and every tree that has been felled is here, on record. The age of each section of the forest is noted, giving the exact time when it's due for felling. Every step of the gradual transformation from yesterday's virgin forest to today's spruce plantation is described in detail. So could these documents reveal places in the roaring mountains that have never seen an axe or saw, parts of the forest that are still undisturbed? 500 years of paperwork is a challenge for even the most experienced researcher. But then, a result. Hasichka found a section of forest that has never been touched by human hands. Parts of the forest that seem to hang between sky and earth. Groups of trees on narrow ridges, spruce trees, and Arola pines at dizzying heights and in dark bottomless pits out of reach of the most daring loggers. The vertical world of the mountains hides the real treasures of the national park. 400 hectares of virgin forest, islands of Scots pine, and untouched wooded canyons. Today, the term virgin forest causes much heated debate. What exactly is a virgin forest? Can we, should we, allow virgin forests to grow in the Alps once more? If many endangered animal and plant species are to survive, they need some sort of natural forest, something with more variety than monocultures of spruce. A mix of coniferous and deciduous trees of different age groups is already much closer to the way the forest used to be. But the beating heart of a virgin forest is its deadwood. Fallen trees provide fertilizer, food, and shelter. The Rosalia alpina, the longhorned beetle, one of the few insects listed as a protected species. It prefers rotting beechwood, but a dead maple tree will do. Together with the longhorned beetles, thousands of other insects have all found a little place of their own in this dead wood, boring, gnawing, and decomposing it, giving the dead wood back to the forest. Even when the only thing on the minds of these beetles is, of course, sex. The female searches for somewhere to lay her eggs, and eventually she settles for the cracks and crevices of an old tree trunk. It'll take years for her larvae to turn into adult beetles. There are isolated places in the Roaring Mountains that are covered by woodland that is similar to a virgin forest. But one day, untouched forests should return to the national park in specially protected zones. There's an impressive list of endangered species protected by the national park. In Central Europe, the eagle owl has been close to extinction for a long time, but it's now making a comeback. Even though not everyone is enthusiastic about its return. Against a 2-kilo bird with a wingspan of 1.7 meters and razor-sharp claws, the hedgehog stands no chance. Another problem from the National Park management is to make sure the roaring mountains are not loved to death. Visitors have been invading this magical place for over 100 years. It started in 1872, when the railway line opened. The rich, the famous, and the curious all left their distant towns and flocked to the region to breathe the fresh mountain air and enjoy the views. World War I brought an end to this early invasion of pleasure seekers. Then came the mountaineers, their hearts full of confidence, their pockets empty. They were true pioneers. With no maps and often badly equipped, many of them paid with their lives for daring to challenge the vertical rock face. Józef Hasitzka understands what has attracted people to the roaring mountains for so long. Nowhere is this better expressed than in a report by Peter Rossegger. He who proceeds to the very heart of this impressive shrine. He who follows the scree slopes to the corrie and sees how the view between the pale walls reveals new valleys and canyons at every corner. He who finally hits upon eternal ice in the lofty basins and finds the eagle's nest. He who is surrounded by barren rock, unable to see a single green leaf anywhere, unable to hear a sound other than the howling of the wind through the reefs, cannot but, with a shaking heart, worship the primal force that eternally builds and unbuilds the mighty rock formations.